So you have different spaces. So you have a secular space, which is the public space, which is the space which is supposed to be neutral, shared values, and then you might have a sacred space or a religious space. And in the 60s onwards, there was the idea floating around that the secular space, the religious space, would contract, as we all realized that we didn't need to lean on religion, we didn't need to lean on God. So that was seen to be diminishing out of our society. That's not proved to be the case. But what it put into the mind was that you had competing bits of territory. That's really important for what it means for us as being church, because we've essentially internalized that. So why is it easier to feel liberated and confident in a church context? I know not everybody is. Or why do we restrict our activities that we link with our faith to our church context, but not in the secular world? It's because that has been going on for a long time, and we've imbibed that within our hearts and minds. So very different. There's still an important place for the sacred. This is a Gothic revival angel candlestick holder, if you're interested. I'm not selling them, I'm just saying that's what it is. You might have those things in your home, they might be meaningful, but they only represent one bit of reality, and the rest of our lives are lived in a secular sense. But what Charles Taylor does is he pushes that even more, and he says it's not actually now about these competing elements of sacred and secular. What he says is that we all now live in a secular age. And he describes it as this. He says that the choice to be religious is just one choice amongst many choices. So to choose to hold to faith is unusual, quite often, and not necessary in the general worldview that we have around us. And so you get angels now being teddy bears on cards. It's a nice teddy bear on a card, rather than images of divine beings guarding against hell. And for Taylor, this is really important because we don't think often about the conditions for faith in which we live, but this is the world that we live in, the secular age, and it affects us all in our identity and practice as the church. So how does it affect us? These three ways. Firstly, the place of faith is contested. You will know this yourselves, but in the world around us, holding a faith position is something that's uncomfortable. You'll have seen stories in the press about people not being able to wear crosses when they're doing their jobs. How do you share your faith as a nurse? You can't share your faith as a nurse in some places, even if you're asked. In some places you can't do that even if the patient's a Christian and you know them from your own church. Some of those rules are there, and I understand why those rules are there, but it shows that the conditions are contested. And effectively, we're all secular now in the way in which we lead our lives, and even where faith plays a role in our lives is up for grabs. We were talking at the back about politics. So you'd again seen in the press when Archbishop Justin spoke out about kind of tax paying, apart from the embarrassing fact that we owned how much percent of Amazon, that actually the headlines were, don't meddle in politics, stick to the spiritual. And that's not just that's not an equal weighting on sacred and secular as we might have had in earlier days. It's the general conditions, it's contested. And that has an effect, that has an impact on us. So when we talk about people not having confidence in faith, not being able to share their faith, not being able to share our faith, when I think about my son who's 13 and his football team play on a Sunday morning, what do I do? He's the vicar's son, so we've got all that kind of pressure, but I want him to play football with his friends. How do I, it's contested. So we're facing a very complex place in that. The second thing that Taylor says is important about these conditions for faith It's what I've called, we have the flat earth society around us. That actually what's considered to be transcendent is flattened. If you talk to young people about this, about what's sacred, they'll talk about friends and family. What's special, what's important, becomes flattened to the here and now. So there's a sense in which within our culture, identifying the transcendent, identifying things that take us out of ourselves or give additional meaning to life, is very hard to find. So our experience of the world is not one where we often find experiences of transcendence. It can be very flat, very, very, very immanent is the word that he uses. But that's really important for understanding things like worship. So if we were to talk to the cobbler, or, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker back in Luther's day, when Luther would say that the expression of that workmanship, which is the word he would use, that expression of that craft is an expression of worship. You can understand in that mindset that you could see that. But come to where we are today and to start talking about people finding their work as a sense of worship, that doesn't land well with us. It's a real struggle, for that to land. So the church, the place of gathered worship, becomes quite important for us because we don't experience that in lots of places out around us, as Taylor would suggest. And then the third one is our own sense of who we are as human beings, our identity. So if you think back to the picture of the gates of hell, we used to have, as Taylor suggests, we had a porous notion of self. If someone caught a cold, it would be a demon. That's why we say, bless you. There was a sense in which we had a porous sense of ourself. And that over time has closed down. We no longer hold that worldview generally. It is there, but our sense of reality has kind of come in on ourselves to our inner life. And that has two things. Firstly, it makes people feel responsible for their own life. So you talk to young people and stress and all things like that. We're responsible for navigating our own pathways, our choices. A lot of responsibility on ourselves in terms of our identity, rather than receiving things in terms of I have this given vocation, or I was born into this family, I'm going to run this company. There's a lot that comes in on ourselves. But also our spirituality becomes very inward focusing. It becomes a matter of our kind of heart and head, not our hands. So Taylor says that these are the conditions that we all live in as Christians. So I can see you all thinking, so what? Thanks for that. I wish I hadn't stood up for the theology bit. The so what is this? These are the conditions for faith. So how do we be church in this and seek God's kingdom? So to start with a well-known passage from Ephesians. So Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors and teachers to equip his people for works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. So in the Church of England we have a notion of ordered ministry. Bishops, priests and deacons as ordered ministry within the church. But if you were to take a biblical foundation for that, which I do, and I believe in ordered ministry, you'll see firstly in this passage that however we're called and however those are described here, the role for those people is building up the people for works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, and all become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. So scripturally, our understanding of church has no divide between lay and ordained in terms of our attaining the measure of the fullness of Christ. We're all called into that calling, or we're all baptized into that calling. But something's gone a bit awry with this idea of building up the people for works of service. So something's gone awry in the way in which we conceive of it happening. And I think what's changing is put on us by the secular age. And this is where we are needing to catch up as a church. I say in these three things, and then we'll break for some questions in about 6.5 minutes' time, roughly. The first area that ministry is changing, and by ministry, what I mean by ministry is God ministers to and